We will start the regular press conference by Minister Hayashi. Minister, the floor is yours. Good morning. I have one point to discuss. From the 29th of November to the 1st of December, I was planning to visit Geneva to attend the 12th WTO Ministerial Conference, but it has been postponed, and therefore my visit has been cancelled. However, the WTO negotiations are still continuing, and the political momentum to advance the reform of the WTO, the core of the multilateral trading system, must not be lost. I have sent a letter to Director General Ms. Okonjo stating that I support her decision in consideration of the health and safety of the participants, and that Japan will continue our proactive contribution to the discussions. In order to advance the rules making to reinforce a free and open international economic system, Japan will continue to lead the discussions by the international community, including the WTO. That's it.
So we'll take questions. Please raise your hand. If you are called upon, please use the nearby microphone to ask a question. Abe-san. This is Yomiuri Shimbun, Abe. With regard to the WTO conference, you were just talking about you decided and to refrain from the participation. This was supposed to be the very first meeting you were going to participate as a foreign minister. But I just would like to share with you your impression about this decision. Right. That was supposed to be the very first overseas trip I was supposed to be engaged in, but the conference itself was postponed. As has been mentioned, first and foremost, this decision. Well, I supported this decision. Needless to say, as Prime Minister Kishida mentioned, I think the crisis management should be prepared for the worst case, and I think that should be the principle to be applied. And needless to say, now this in-person meeting is suspended, and that is the fact we have to accept. But at the same time, this momentum needs to be kept. Therefore, going forward, we are going to be proactively engaged in the discussion, and that is extremely important for us.
Next question, Miki-san. Miki, Nikkei Shimbun. Related to the latest question, the WTO Ministerial and the arrival of a president of the EU also has been cancelled going forward. Whilst the in-person meeting was recovering, how do you analyze the impact of the Omicron variant? And the Prime Minister's visit to the US or the US-Japan 2+2 that are under a plan, what might be the impact? Indeed, the latest COVID-19 situation, what might be the impact onto diplomatic events and schedules, I do not want to make premature judgment. Having said that, as was just discussed, to have face-to-face meeting with the top officials of different countries and to spend quite a lot of time to engage in in-depth discussion about global issues and to deepen understanding is extremely important. At any rate, we will observe the border controls and infection controls of all countries, including Japan, and will take appropriate measures.
Next question, over there. This is Jimbo, Minister. Now, there was just a talk about the Omicron variant in South Africa. It was first disclosed and discovered. And according to WHO, there is a talk about a gap or difference of vaccination or not. And there is going to be raised a possibility of a new variant. And I think this is made visible. And that's one of the views expressed by the experts. And through COVAX, there is a certain level of support given by the Japanese government. And going forward, I think the third shots to be done in the industrial nations. And Mr. Tedros is saying that before that, that vaccination should be spread across the developing countries. With the outbreak of Omicron variant, is the Japanese government ready to expand support to developing countries? In particular, vaccination rate is extremely low in the African continent. Do you have any intention to take that direction? As you have mentioned, I think even if there is a calm down of COVID-19 in Japan, if there is going to be the remaining virus, it would mean the possibility of re-expansion. Therefore, in order to prevent the spread of the infectious disease on a global scale is extremely important. In particular, speaking of vaccines, everywhere in every country and region, safety and effectiveness and the quality assured vaccine should be made accessed by all the people. This is extremely important. And at the G20 meeting, it was agreed that by mid-next year, 70% of the total world population should be vaccinated. And with regard to this goal, the Japanese government supports. And in order to achieve this target, the production, development, transportation, and actual vaccination of vaccines, such comprehensive measures should be promoted. And that will enable us to place trust on vaccine. And in that line, 1 billion financial support toward the COVAX facility. And we have already provided 30 million shots of vaccine. And in total, we are going to add 30 million more, up into 60 million. And that would be the aid in kind we would like to provide. And another important aspect is last 1 mile, for example, that the refrigerator support. And with regard to this kind of a support, we have already decided to provide 13.7 billion yen to 59 countries. We would like to continue necessary support.
Next question. Yes, Aoki-san. Aoki, NHK. Yesterday, the new border controls has been announced for prevention. What about the possible relaxation or changes in the operations, and what will be the reasons and grounds for changing the measures? The Omicron variant has occurred, and we do have a very strong sense of a crisis. In order to avoid the worst possible scenario, we have decided an emergency preventive measure. The Prime Minister is constantly discussing that the most important point of crisis management is to prepare for the worst possible scenario for border controls. When new variants are expanding, when situation is exacerbating, we must be agile and flexible in our response. And we want to eliminate the concerns of the Japanese population in a preventive manner. And we want to respond quickly and rapidly. So based on that consideration, the latest measures have been implemented.
Nishimura of Radio France. Thank you. Some members of the Constitutional Democratic Party, the reentry of the foreigners should not be permitted into reentry. And what kind of idea do you have, Minister? As has been mentioned, when it comes into the Omicron variant, we have a very strong sense of crisis. In order to avoid the worst-case scenario, the preventive emergency measure is introduced. except any extraordinary situation, all foreigners are barred from entry. And with regard to those who will be able to re-enter, they are not the newcomers, so they are going to be excluded from the scope.
井口さん。井口中国新聞 newspaper. Today this afternoon, the G7 summit to be hosted by Japan in 2023. Hiroshima Prefecture, the city of Hiroshima, and the Hiroshima Chamber of Commerce, they are going to make an official announcement to wish to host. I have asked this question before, but once again, what is the process to decide the site and what are the conditions required of hosting locations? Indeed, as of today, Hiroshima Prefecture, the city of Hiroshima, are planning to make an official announcement that they wish to host the G7 summit to be hosted in Japan in 2023. After documents are submitted by the local government authorities, information will be collected, analyzed, and reviewed regarding the candidate sites. And after the appropriate procedures, the site will be decided. As for the decision of the location of the summit, at the moment, the dates are not decided, but before the summit of next year to be hosted in Germany, the government wishes to make the decision.
Related question. Now, the mayor of Hiroshima, that the nuclear power countries also part of this conference, it is a good opportunity to express the importance of the nuclear weapons issues. How do you view it? Now, in terms of the selection of the city, there are different kinds of aspects are going to be monitored, including hotel, the conference venues, and transportation access and security. All those factors are going to be combined together to determine the site.
Sugawara-san. Sugawara Sashimbun newspaper about Ethiopia, where conflicts are ongoing at the moment. Commercial flights are in operation. However, because of the Omicron variant, going forward, there might be an impact onto those flights. The government, I know, have sent people to Djibouti to collect information, but I would like to ask your observation at the moment and possible responses if there is a request for the self-defense forces to be deployed. About the situation in Ethiopia, we have a very strong sense of crisis. First of all, we are doing our utmost in order to collect the information. From the 3rd of this month and beyond, we have been patiently calling on the Japanese to depart. On the 26th of this month, we have raised the entire country to level 4, which alerts people to leave the country. As a result, at this moment, according to our confirmation, the Japanese people remaining in Ethiopia, apart from the employees at the embassy, it has declined to some 40 persons or so, including persons working for international organizations. At the moment, we have not received any information that there has been physical danger to the Japanese. As was mentioned on the 26th, indeed, as you mentioned, an investigative team of Foreign Ministry and Defense Ministry members have been sent to Djibouti in order to reinforce information collection. We will collect more information and we will make sure to ensure the safety of the Japanese with a sense of high alert. As was mentioned at this moment, indeed, commercial flights are operating. Therefore, regarding the Japanese people, we are calling on the Japanese people to leave the country using the commercial flights. But we will continue to monitor the local situation, including the airport operations. We will carefully communicate between relevant ministries and agencies, and about the possible sending of self-defense forces aircraft, we will make appropriate responses.
Next question. And this is Jimbo. A follow-up question. Minister, when it comes to dealing with the Omicron, they have to be prepared for the worst case scenario to put in place the border control measures. In the past practices, the situation worsens and then responsive measures to be taken. And that was how the practice was. But this time around, we don't know to what extent the risk is when it comes to the Omicron. That's what the President of the United States is talking about. But probably one of the most strict measures were put in place by the Japanese government. As Prime Minister mentioned, this is an action prepared for the worst case. That means when it comes to the border control measures, in particular with regard to COVID-19, it is a preventive measures, the preparing for the worst case scenario, and then relaxed if the situation is not that worse. So do you think it is a departure from the past policies? Is it a new policy that is intentionally taken, or is it just by coincidence? That is because of a lower number of infection cases. Would you please elaborate on that, Minister? I think the whole government has made a decision on this topic. That means, as has been mentioned, if I may recap what I have mentioned, what is most important is to prepare for the worst case. That's what the Prime Minister is talking about. And therefore, from the viewpoint of border control measures, there is the outbreak of the new variant. We have to be flexible in taking responses. This has been repeatedly mentioned. Therefore, in order to dispel any concern among the Japanese people, that is another important factor that the Prime Minister was pointing to. Therefore, based on that posture, we had decided to introduce immediate measures. And that's what the Prime Minister himself is talking about. Therefore, based on that concept, we have introduced the latest measures.
Further questions? Mr. Sushiro. The Tribune. Sushiro, good morning. Entries from all countries and regions will not be permitted. But about diplomats, when they wish to come to Japan, what might be the impact? What preparation will be required? I am not sure whether I have understood your question correctly, but what has already been announced, the processes will be implemented according to the announcement. And regarding the measures, the government will provide a careful explanation.
Any other questions? And that's the end of the press conference. Thank you very much.